What role does language play in defining our community and culture? Many would argue that our spoken language is the foundation for what defines us as human beings. So, what happens if we fail to acquire a spoken language? Do we in turn not belong to a community? Without language, it becomes difficult to have an understanding of the world around us. For some deaf people, this can be a harsh reality. If deaf people fail to learn a form of sign language or understand spoken language by lip reading, they can become lost. People in the deaf community cling to their language to understand the world around them. Yes, deaf people have their own community, with a very distinct culture, and sign language plays a key role in defining this community. The deaf community is often not a recognized community by the hearing. This is typically just due to ignorance. It is important, however, for everyone to recognize that not all deaf or hard of hearing people belong to the deaf community. In fact, deaf people can be divided into two very distinct groups. First, there is the deaf community with a capital D. These are the people who embrace sign language and the identity that comes with being a deaf person with other aspects of deaf culture that I will discuss in more detail later. The second group includes those who are deaf with a lowercase d. These are the people who do not embrace deaf culture. Typically, they are deaf people who have cochlear implants or hearing aids, giving them the ability to hear again for the most part. Many people who have cochlears do not identify themselves with the deaf community and often work cohesively within the hearing community, lacking some or all forms of the connections between themselves and deaf culture. As you can imagine, this has resulted in a very big debate about cochlear implants within the deaf community itself. Many people feel that if they get cochlear implants, they lose identity as a deaf person and no longer belong to the deaf community. Certainly, there are many advantages to cochlear implants. It can sometimes be difficult to find jobs as a deaf person due to the judgments that hearing people have against them. Many people feel that a cochlear implant will open more opportunities up for them. On the other hand, some people in the deaf community are extremely against cochlear implants because they do not feel that being deaf is a disability and is something that needs to be fixed. Either way, it is an extremely debatable topic within the deaf community and with other family members or friends that associate themselves with the deaf people. Despite that being said, the extent of hearing loss or ability to regain their hearing is not what defines a member of the deaf community. It is the individual's own sense of identity within the community itself and the acceptance of its culture. Just like other social groups or teams that a person chooses to belong to, a person is a member of the deaf community if they identify themselves as a member of the deaf community and other members accept that person as a part of the community. I will be focusing on the distinctions between the deaf community with the capital D and the hearing community due to their differences in language, identity, and perspective on the world. First, while most members of the hearing community would view deafness as a disability, members of the deaf community do not. The term hearing impaired can be insulting to a deaf person because it implies that hearing is the norm and being deaf is considered less than or disabled. This is not the way that they view themselves. For the most part, people in the deaf community do not view their inability to hear as a loss. It is just a difference in how they view the world. Another key difference between the deaf community and the hearing community is, of course, the language. One would argue that sign language lays the foundation for the deaf community. Deaf people mostly use sign language to communicate with those around them. In the U.S., most people use ASL or Signed English. The biggest and most obvious difference between ASL and spoken English is the fact that one is a visual language while the other is auditory. Many people do not even recognize ASL as a language. When asked about different languages around the world, people will list things like English, Spanish, French, Chinese, or other languages similar to those. Many people would not think to list ASL or any other forms of sign language, such as BSL, and would be surprised to learn that ASL is the third most common language used in the U.S. as of 1998. Despite popular belief, ASL is not just a string of symbols for every English word we have. It has its own sentence structure as well as distinct grammatical rules. For example, instead of signing, "I promise I will finish my homework," one would sign the subject first, followed by the action, instead of word for word, which is referred to as Signed English. If you were to say the signs word for word as you sign them, it would read, "My homework, I promise, finish, will." Because of this unique structure, some deaf people have problems reading or learning how to read, almost as if they're learning a foreign language because of the grammatical differences and missing words that are not signed but implied by context and facial expressions. Some examples of these are words like a and the, along with be verbs which do not exist physically in sign language. Despite this being said, the fact that people have struggle reading is not the case for everyone, and many deaf people read just as well as hearing people. Another key difference between the deaf community and the hearing community is the intimacy in conversation. This is made possible by eye contact and general body language. In a deaf world, eye contact is vital to communication. If you are not facing the person you are conversing with, you will be unable to pick up information that is crucial to the conversation. In the hearing world, we can carry on a conversation while not facing individuals we are speaking to. Sometimes we can even not be in the same room. For example, we can be facing away from people, or something simple like texting others or doing the dishes. Hearing people are able to multitask, which can be a good thing, but often they are only half listening
to what the person speaking is trying to say. Imagine having to always face the person you are speaking to. No turning your back in an argument, no yelling at your siblings from the next room. This is how things are in the deaf community and in the deaf world. All conversations are intimate. Intimate from the perspective that you are always facing the person, making direct eye contact, and sensing their emotions. Without these visual cues, you will be unaware of what is going on in a conversation and will lose touch with the person you are speaking to. Deaf conversations are also more intimate from the perspective that individuals show a lot of emotion on their face and in their gestures. Signing with no expression is similar to someone lecturing in a monotone voice all the time. The message loses substance and meaning to the people on the receiving end of the conversation. In spoken English, we use inflection in our voices in order to help tell what we are trying to convey to others. Obviously, in sign language, there are no tones for speakers to move up or down in order to tell if they're asking a question or if simply making a statement. In sign language, the speaker uses facial expressions, such as movement of their eyebrows or other facial expressions, to aid them with their ability to convey a message. In addition to eye contact, general body language is also extremely important in the deaf community. For example, you cannot say, "I'm happy," with a sad expression and drooping shoulders. If you were to do this, the person you're signing to may become confused with what you're saying. Sign language not only gives the deaf community a language to bond over, but it enhances the relationships between individuals within the community because of the intimacy and expressionism that comes with using ASL. So what is it like to be a part of the deaf community? When I started learning sign, I became very hyper-aware of everything I was hearing. I started to wonder what it would be like to be part of the deaf community for a day. I must admit, while thinking about what it would be like to be deaf, I thought of it as a disability, as many people from the hearing community would. However, as I mentioned previously, the deaf community does not see their hearing loss as a disability. People who associate themselves with the deaf community do not see it as a hearing loss, but as a deaf gain. At first, this did not make sense to me. Who would not want to be able to hear? As I did more research, I found myself getting more information on deaf culture. Although deaf people are often misunderstood, discriminated against, and have a hard time communicating with those in the hearing world, many would not want to become hearing if they had the choice.
This misunderstanding is also why we need to be more aware and accepting of deaf people and their culture.
Most people in the deaf community see themselves as a close-knit group, almost like a family, brought together by a common language as well as a unique perspective on the world that many others do not possess. Let's say a deaf person meets another deaf person. They automatically have a common bond. This is not the case in the hearing world. If you were to go up to a random hearing person in a store and start talking to them, they may be nice and carry on a conversation.